Right. Okay, I think there's quite a lot of us in. Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Co-op Party Summer School. Hopefully that's what you're expecting. And this evening we're going to give an introduction to the work of the Co-op Party in local government. My name's Emma Hoddinott. I'm the local government officer for the Co-op Party, so my job is to support our wonderful Labour and Co-op councillors up and down the country. I'm also joined by my colleague, James Butler. If you want to introduce yourself, James.
Hello, thank you, Emma. I'm James Butler. I'm the campaigns officer. I'm also a northerner and have suffered quite a lot of rain today. So.
Yes, a bit of a northern caucus. I'm also a councillor and a cabinet member as well up in Rotherham here in South Yorkshire. Just a few bits of housekeeping for you. You've noticed that this meeting is being recorded. We are going to make it available to you on YouTube afterwards for people who can't join us this evening. So if you don't want to appear on that, then please turn off your video and then you won't be seen as part of that. So if you don't want to be seen in the recording, then please turn off your video camera. You may have noticed as everybody's come in, we've muted you all. That's just so you can hear us a lot clearer. We will unmute people towards the end because there'll be opportunity to ask any questions at the end of our sort of short presentation that we're doing. And there's 3 ways you can ask questions. If during the presentation, you can stick it in the chat function there. You can also use the virtual hand button as well, but also you can email events@party.coop if you want to ask a question, and we'll take those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a presentation and see if I can share my screen with you successfully. So here we go. And hopefully people can see that. If I can get it to start. There we go. Is it working, James?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. So just in terms of the Co-op Party in local government, it's just one of the many levels where we have Co-op Party representation. We have a number of members of Parliament, we have people in the House of Lords, the Welsh Assembly, Scottish Parliament, but we've got over 800 councillors all over the UK and at every level of local government as well. So from parish and town councils right up to unitary councils, metro mayors as well. We cover the broad range of all different councils. And just to give you an idea of our size in local government, this is the number of councillors by party. We have more councillors than the SNP and the Greens. And in England, about 14% of Labour councillors are Labour and cooperative councillors. Now, what we have in the Co-op Party is that we have an electoral agreement with the Labour Party that's been around for decades, which allows people to stand jointly for both the Labour Party and the Co-op Party, and that's how you get to be known as Labour and cooperative. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically you're representing both parties. And the reason why people do that is it's a public commitment to us being cooperators. It tells the people on the ballot paper or in your campaign literature that you are a cooperator and you're supported by the Co-op Party. We also provide support from local parties, and if you are a candidate or a councillor, you get access to our national campaigns and resources, and James is going to touch on some of our current campaigns later on. But you also become part of our national network of cooperative councillors that has been growing enormously over the last couple of years. And just how that works, so if you are standing in local government, you go through the normal Labour selections of the application, the panel interview, and your ward selection, and then you then get the Co-op Party nomination. We are a separate party, it is a separate process, But once you get both the nomination from Labour and the Co-op, then you're officially a Labour and Co-op candidate, and hopefully if elected you become a Labour and Co-op councillor as well. And what's that look like? Well, that's what it looks like on the ballot paper. You get to call yourself Labour and Cooperative, but you can also see from the various photos there, we have Labour and Cooperative branding. Looks very similar to the Labour Party, but it's that public commitment to being a cooperator. And you can use it on your campaign literature, and it can be on your ballot paper as well. If you are interested in getting more involved, if you're not currently a councillor, if you're interested in local government, even if you're interested for standing for us, then you get we're about to launch the Co-op Candidate Development Programme. This is for people who are interested in standing for the elections next year, and we have an online application process for that. It's open to people who've already been selected by the Labour Party to stand, or just people who are interested in finding out more, seeing if they fancy being a councillor, if it's something they want to explore, and what they look at as well. So that programme is there. If you're a member, you'll be getting an email in the next couple of weeks about that as well. So don't worry about scribbling down that URL. We will be communicating with all members, but we do provide that support and those resources to help you get elected. I think it's probably worth touching on next year because there are some bumper elections. We were going through the process for 2020, and then of course with just a few months to go, the elections were cancelled due to COVID. What that means is all the elections that were due to happen this year roll forward to next year, along with all the elections that were going to happen anyway. And you can see that gives us a massive 4,400 council seats are up next year, and we'd love to see loads of cooperators standing in those. We also have really important elections in Scotland, in Wales as well for the parliaments. The London Assembly is up for election. We have police and crime commissioners, and I'll come on to that, but also mayors as well, and key mayors in Manchester. Andy Burnham is a Labour and Co-op mayor, and we have Liam Byrne as well as a Labour and Co-op candidate for the West Midlands. So really important elections, not just for the Co-op Party, but for the Labour Party as well, across all of the country. And then the year after that, not to forget that we actually have all the council seats up in Scotland and Wales up as well. So if people are interested, thinking a few years ahead of standing in Scotland or Wales, then you're encouraged to join the development programme as well. Just to give you a flavour, I talked a little bit about those, about where those elections are. They're all over the place basically, and we've got districts and counties all happening in the same place. So it's good. There's a lot going on next year. And we really want to encourage people to be part of that. Just to give you an idea of where Labour and Co-op councillors are at the moment, we have everything from one councillor in opposition on some councils to some very large groups across the country. So places like Greenwich, the vast majority of councillors are Labour and Co-op. They have a long-standing tradition, they have a co-op development agency, a good relationship in working with their co-op sector. So naturally we see quite a lot of Labour and Co-op councillors there, but also some in opposition as well. You can see there like Medway as well. So just to give you an idea that we cover all areas of the country and have some quite large groupings of councillors. I mentioned police crime commissioners. I think police and crime commissioners are really important elections, and this shows you the majority of PCCs that are standing next year will actually be Labour and Co-op. So those nice purple splodges on the map are where we've got Labour and cooperative candidates, and we work with them on really important campaigns like violence against shop workers, for example, where we can work with police and crime commissioners and our candidates to raise that important issue, also look at what practical action we can take to tackle that locally. So that's a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what we look like in local government. I just want to touch on a little bit about what we've been doing during COVID-19, because our councillors have been amazing and have really been on the front line and responding to some of the issues. And that's what you expect from us as cooperators in terms of that self-help and direct practical action in our communities. Just to rewind a little bit right to the start of this pandemic, you know, our Co-op MPs were in Parliament making sure that retail workers were recognised in that key worker legislation, which gave them the protections, access to childcare and things like that. And it was our MPs of our party that made the case for that. It was also members like you that joined 10,000 people to thank our retail workers as well. They've absolutely been on the front line, but they've also had to deal with increasing violence in the workplace as well. And we continue to campaign on that really important issue. Right at the start as well, we were after clarity about food banks. Some food banks actually closed because the guidance was not clear. We had a huge petition as a party and managed to get that clarity for food banks and that they could open. And you may have seen some of our previous Zoom meetings and emails around our recently published Owning the Future. And I think we're now starting to look at how we can make our values as cooperators and co-ops being central to that recovery, to what happens next. And I think that's really important that we're part of that discussion. In local government, we've been looking at the concept of people being a community cooperator. And we do have a pledge for anybody who's interested. I'll stick it into the chat function when I finish this presentation. You can pledge to carry on that spirit of cooperation that we've seen. You know, people have got to know their neighbours. People have put bits of paper through the door on their street. You know, that community cooperation and that spirit of working together is something that we don't want to lose. You know, we don't want to go back to what we had before. And it's really important that we do that, and we're asking people to pledge to do that in their communities too. So just some examples from across the country. This is Greenwich Council that I mentioned before, large number of co-op councillors. They have a really strong relationship with their cooperative sector. They had a really whole place approach, whole partnership approach with people like the council, the development agency, all playing their bit as part of that. One example, and the card that you can see there, is that the council got a large donation of flour from the O2. Rather than distributing that, the local Greenwich Development Agency produced these cards to give them the recipes to make flatbread as well with that flour. And that, you know, they've done all sorts in terms of providing that food, but also assistance to people during the crisis as well. Another example of a group that's in opposition in North Warwickshire, they as councillors set up a local volunteer network. They helped with some of the things you have to do around checking and verifying councillors and volunteers. And what was interesting is that their councillors actually set up their own shop, the Polesworth Food Hub, and you can see some fantastic pictures of that. And not only were they providing sort of a food bank, but they're actually providing access in a rural location to fresh local produce and basic supplies as well. And they had a huge number of volunteers involved with that, and a great example of co-op councillors really stepping in and providing direct practical assistance to their community. Another example where they already had a food bank was the Witney Baby Bank. Again, very early on, seeing that need for families who are really struggling with essentials. You know, a lot of this baby stuff is expensive, and they've been focusing on providing those baby essentials to families in their area, working alongside their food bank. Again, lots of volunteers involved with that within the community. And then the final example is from Tamworth, and you can see a lovely picture there of Simon, who's a local councillor working with Central England Co-op, picking up the deliveries. And Simon's been an absolute star, going around various places every night to pick up donations for their local food bank. But actually they've taken a really cooperative approach, lots of different organisations working together cooperatively and being able to provide a whole range of services to their residents. So not just the food donations, but befriending and signposting as well. And a really good example of using those values of everybody working together to provide a really good service to their residents in that area. I think what is really interesting is what happened next, and James will talk about our campaign on food justice, which I think is really interesting for all of those that have been involved with this kind of work during COVID-19. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to James to talk about those.
Thank you, Emma. I've got 3 slides, one on context, one on food justice, and one on Love It, List It. But I just wanted to touch on how we go about campaigning, really. We have got this unique relationship with the Labour Party whereby we've kind of outsourced winning elections to the Labour Party. You know, we don't go knocking on doors saying I'm from the Co-op Party. Generally speaking, you kind of say I'm Labour and Co-op. And obviously with the pandemic, how do we design campaigns that work? Because none of us, I suspect, are that keen on knocking on strangers' doors right now, even if strangers would be willing to open their doors. A number of us will be self-isolating and not able to get out. Likewise, we've got a huge array of experience within the party. We've got people with very little door knocking experience who just like the ethos of the Co-op Party. We've got people who've been Labour Party members for 20 years and have finally got round to joining the Co-op Party. So we try and design campaigns which suit all of that range of experience, and which latterly can be used basically from your own bedroom or from your own front room, not necessarily as part of your doorstep patter. The other kind of point to make is we try and design campaigns which complement both what the Co-op movement itself is doing, but also the Labour Party is doing. We don't want to try and steal their thunder. We're not into replacing them, but likewise, there's probably some gaps in what they're putting forward, which allow us to express our distinctiveness. May I have the next slide, Emma, if that's all right? Thank you. So the first campaign is our latest one, which is called Love It, List It. And the background to that is, even before the pandemic, we were losing around 4,000 community spaces. And there's a trend going on in high streets, and likewise austerity's impact on local authorities means they're increasingly relying on asset disposals rather than investment. And COVID was really accelerated. I think certainly the decline of the high street. I rather suspect when the dust is settled, we'll have a new round of austerity on the public sector. I mean, let's hope not, but that would be my fear. The legislation around protecting community assets is not great. It also varies somewhat between Scotland, Wales, and England. So apologies for slightly having an English focus on this, but we're going to rely on the Localism Act 2012, which allows you to go about listing community assets, and community assets are defined in legislation, but broadly are what you might think they are, where people get together and have got value for the community. So, you know, the community hall, the pub, the post office, the open space, the recreational ground, the library. There is a fiendishly difficult process that you can go about listing this, and we detail that on our resources page. It's much easier if you've got a parish or a town council in your area, because you can approach the town or parish council and say, will you do the paperwork? Will you list this? And if you go to your local authority's website and just put in community assets register, you'll see a list of what's been already protected for 5 years and what has been rejected. It's also a way of kind of distinguishing ourselves, really. For those of you, and I see a few familiar faces who've ever door knocked on the Labour Party's behalf, the voter ID questions are terribly transactional. You know, have you ever voted Labour? Have you, you know, how are you likely to vote in the future? Can you remember how you voted last time? And it's not necessarily always the most productive conversation. This just gives us for those who want to, could you just go back one for me, Emma?
Yep, there you go.
Trying to rush me. I won't be long. This kind of gives you an extra bow to your arrow to your quiver, in that you can say, well, actually, rather than going to a hard voter ID question, you can say, you know, what do you love about their area? Do we need to protect these assets? And have a different type of kind of conversation. There's a big long presentation about Love It Listed, which I'm happy to talk to individually, or alternatively.
You know, if you have local community facilities that you want to protect or are under threat, then have a look at the resource and get in touch with James about how you might be able to campaign on that locally.
If I could get the next one.
Yep.
Right, food justice. It's quite hard to define what food justice is, but we all know what hunger is. And even before the pandemic, around 8 million people were struggling to put food on the table regularly. Those are figures produced by and published by the UN. Post-pandemic and during the pandemic, there's recently a publication by the Food Standards Authority, which is well worth a read, which just details some of the problems which people are having, whether they're self-isolating, the additional costs of getting deliveries from mainstream retailers, the poor quality food for those who are shielding. We've got a very practical set of proposals which people can campaign for locally, and that is for their councils, have a lead member who is responsible for food insecurity or for food poverty. Create or work with a food partnership that brings together all the organisations in your area who are working on food, and that's the food banks. It's probably the COVID support groups who've sprung up. It almost certainly includes kind of social enterprises and charities working in your area. It might be the Rotarians. You know, there's a whole group of charitable and cooperative minded organisations working on this, and they can be drawn into a partnership, which would then lead to create a food action plan, which identifies who are in need and how you can sort them. And we're also kind of lobbying the government for a right to food, again, slightly different in Scotland, Wales, and England. The really exciting thing, I think, on this campaign, which was launched last year before the COVID crisis, was that we're seeing cross-party agreement on motions about this. Just recently, we've seen one in Suffolk where I think the Labour group of about half a dozen persuaded a Tory group of 70 or so to create a food partnership. Likewise in Medway, from opposition, really demonstrating how they can take a lead. For each of the campaigns, there are letters and whatnot on the pages, which you as individuals can do and just keep both food justice and community assets in the public eye. Letters to the local papers, petitions, that kind of thing. Plenty of resources. There's no excuse not to do it. You can post on Facebook groups and the like locally, just to give yourself a bit of profile and to try and effect genuine and positive change. That's me done.
Thank you very much, James. Really some good examples for people to look at, yeah, and really good in terms of working, whether you're a local councillor or working with your local councillors or trying to persuade your council to take these things on board. So we're going to open it up to questions and comments, and anything you want to ask us. Feel free to stick it in the chat box. There's a few already there, particularly about standing as Labour and Co-op, and yeah, it's always a bit difficult to get your head around standing for two parties. So the first one is around, can you stand as Co-op party only and not with the Labour Party? No, is the short answer. It's always Labour and Co-operative Party. So you stand jointly for both parties. That means you have to have the nomination for both parties as well, from both the Labour Party and the Co-op Party as well. You can't just be Co-op Party, I'm afraid, if you're standing for election. You can just be a Co-op Party member, but as under electoral agreement, you do have to stand for both parties. So Anthony has asked me about candidates standing, more than one candidate standing in awards. So a lot of us that who are in all outs, for example, not just one candidate up at a time. You can have 2 or 3 people in awards with you. And the question is, do you all have to be Labour and Co-op, or is it an individual decision? It's up to you as an individual. You can stand individually as Labour and Cooperative, and your 2 other colleagues, for example, may not want to do that. There is a little sort of thing to be wary of under our electoral agreement. To have Labour and Co-op on the ballot paper, all of you have got to be Labour and Cooperative, basically. You can't have one person on the ballot paper, Labour and Cooperative, and the other 2 just as Labour. That's just not to confuse the electorate, basically. So it looks like there's different parties. So if you're in a multi-member ward on the ballot paper, you've all got to be Labour, or you've all got to be Labour and Cooperative. But that's the only difference, basically. If you're standing as Labour and Cooperative, and your 2 colleagues are Labour, you can still have it on your literature. You're still supported by us. If elected, you can still call yourself a Labour and Cooperative councillor. It just means you can't have it on the ballot paper. And that's just because of that rule between us and the Labour Party about not confusing the electorate and not having a mix of Labour and Co-op on the ballot paper. It is a little thing to get your head around, but don't worry about it too much. We will walk you through your individual circumstances, but basically individually, if you want to be Labour and Co-op, then you can join our programme and do that, which is good. I've got a question about Tina is asking, how do you get the Co-op nomination? Use the online form, basically. So I put up the Cooperative Candidate Development Programme. If you join that programme, we will ask you lots of details, but that will take you through the process of getting the Co-op Party nomination. So I don't know, James, whether you can put that link for me in the chat box, but there is that online application form. So how do you get the Co-op nomination? Apply to our programme and fill in that online form. Once we get that form, there'll be lots of help and support to take you through the process, but most importantly, all those details will go to your local Co-op party, because it's your local party that will endorse you as a party candidate. So you fill in the form centrally, and locally they make the decision whether to endorse you or not. Oh, and I think James has put that, which is very good. There's a few more about standing as a councillor. This is really good. I'm really hoping that we're going to see lots of you as candidates for next year, which is great. So Sarah, thank you for a question about being a town councillor. Could I stand for Labour and Co-op next time? Yes, absolutely you can. What you can't do is change halfway through your term. So if you were elected a few years ago and you now join the Co-op party, you can't just call yourself a Labour and Co-op councillor. You've got to apply for our nomination for the election, basically. But you can do it each time you're up for election. So you're up for election in a couple of years' time, then absolutely you can apply for our nomination then and become Labour and Co-op, even if you were Labour last time. But you do have to do it when you stand for election. You can't do it retrospectively or halfway through your term, I'm afraid. There's a question from Janice, in terms of financial support, then that is down to the local co-op party, so they have access to the resource, and most of them do actually provide some kind of financial support to your campaign if you're a Labour and co-op candidate. And that does vary across the country, but that is normally provided. It is separate to the decision about whether you are a candidate, as it's done at that local level, but normally there is some kind of financial support for that. You also get help and support from us nationally as well in terms of campaigning. Tina asks about county and district. In that application form somewhere, let us know that you're a joint candidate, because we need to sort that out basically, and you'll need separate certificates for the nomination papers from us. So if you are standing for more than one election, so town and district or district and county, then let us know. There's an application, there's a box in there in terms of your statement. Let us know that you're standing for both, so we can deal with that. So that is absolutely great. We've got another one. If you've already been selected, I guess if you've already been selected by the Labour Party, now's the time to apply for that co-op party nomination. You can do it after you've been selected by the Labour Party. So you can, they're two different nomination processes. They're independent of each other. So if you've been selected by Labour for the county, then absolutely get that application in and become a co-op party candidate as well. Just to some important things, make sure your agent knows, but also whoever's putting together your literature. If you're endorsed as a Labour and Co-operative candidate, we provide you with all the logos and everything. They are slightly different. It's Labour and Co-op logo, but we provide you with those, and make sure that whoever's running your campaign on that. Really important question around how do we get co-op policies onto party manifestos. That's where we look to you, both as members and councillors. You'll have local campaign forums and CLP meetings, probably local manifesto. Some do consultations. There's an opportunity to feed in our ideas. We have something called 12 ideas for local manifestos that we will provide to people. You've also heard some of those ideas around community assets and food justice as well. So we do have a list of co-op policies, and we will look to councillors, candidates and members to get those into the local Labour Party manifestos as well, and we provide the resources. All of our policies, most of them have been tried and tested by some council across the country. Normally somebody has already done it and put forward a motion, so it's not too difficult to convince your local party that this is a great idea. And actually, I think if you look at our work around owning the future, some of those issues, like how we rejuvenate our high street, how do we build back better, and how do we get more cooperatives, more businesses rooted in our communities, are all things that would be really useful for your area as they look to recover from the pandemic. So I've got a question from Tricia. In terms of if you're having any issues, then feel free to contact us. What I'll do, I'll put our local government email in the chat box there. So if you do need any help or support with that in terms of getting support, then just let us know and we can get involved in that case. I'm also, and I hope he doesn't mind, I'm going to put James's email in there in case anybody wants to take forward any of the ideas around campaigning forward as well. James and I are available to talk to local Labour parties, local co-op or Labour Party branches. We don't have to travel the country if you're doing it by Zoom, so we're more than happy to pop in and talk about what the Co-op Party is, or some of our campaigns, but also the local government stuff as well. So I can't see any further questions, I don't think, in terms of the chat box. I can't see any hands up either. So if there aren't any further questions, lovely to meet you this evening. Nice to welcome to the Co-op Party as well. I hope you found that a useful sort of run through about what we do in local government. We really value that work at a local level. We value our Co-op councillors. They've done amazing work during the last few months, and would like to see lots of people join them next year. And feel free to get in touch with me or my colleague James if there's anything you'd like to follow up as a result of tonight. So without further ado, I'll let you to go and enjoy the rain or have your tea, and have a good evening. Thank you.